So I'm Michael Tippett. I'm one of the co-founders here. We actually have three partners in the company that started it, and I was the original co-founder here. The company started in my garage here in Vancouver, and I've been doing internet stuff for about 15 years now. The company is about 5 years old. We have roughly 20 employees worldwide, mostly here in Vancouver in the city, and we have a product team that designs and builds product. We have a technology team that does all the software design and development, and we have an editorial team of about 6 people worldwide, mostly in Vancouver, who organize and manage the content that comes in. We have about almost 200,000 people worldwide who are contributing to our website globally on any number of topics.
The slogan of NowPublic is crowd-powered media.
Yeah.
How do you define crowd-powered media?
Well, I guess we've sort of struggled with this idea of what it is that we're building since the inception of the company to some extent, because one of the issues I think people have with participatory involvement in the news is that they don't often see they don't see their own experiences as newsworthy. And so one of the things we've really tried to do since the inception of the company is to try and lower the bar in terms of people's own expectations. So you might see a fire, or you might see something that would traditionally appear in a news organization, a newspaper, television, what have you. But because people are used to expressing themselves as news reporters, it's often intimidating for them to get involved. So although we are a news organization and we see ourselves as a news organization, the way we address that with our contributors and our readers is that they are part of a collaborative process, part of the crowd, part of the organization that can bring this material to the surface. So for us, it's different from traditional news in that it's participatory, so it's not just from the top down to the audience. It's something that you engage in as an audience member, and it's also crowd-powered or collaborative. In other words, there are more than one voice telling the story.
So it's basically a different term for citizen journalism?
Yeah, we call it participatory journalism or participatory media, which is a bit of a mouthful. But we really try and avoid the idea of citizen journalism, even though people, I think, understand what we do as citizen journalism. And one of the reasons is because people who are sending us content and contributing to the stories don't ever really see themselves as journalists. They just see themselves as being involved in the story as it's unfolding. We had just yesterday, Whistler Mountain got hit by lightning and caught on fire, and within minutes we had people sending us photographs, not because they're journalists or have training or are looking at things from a journalistic perspective, just because they happen to be Whistler and they see the mountain on fire and they take a picture and send it in. So we make news, but we don't assume that the people who are making it are aware that they're being journalistic in their pursuit.
But how does the platform turn out journalism in the end if the contributors don't perceive themselves as journalists? How does it become journalism?
That's a good question. Well, I think you could ask the question, is it journalism at all? Or is it simply surfacing information that is out there? And I think there's a difference. I mean, if you're a journalist, you are typically trained, or you have some professional credentials, and you are aware of certain aspects of telling a story, like you need to be objective and represent multiple viewpoints and all of these things. And NowPublic attempts to get those values articulated by building a system that will encourage that. So in other words, if you're reporting a story on NowPublic, we will encourage you to be even-handed in your reportage of it, but we think it's more effective to have different people come to the story from different perspectives and allow the even-handedness to come from that. So in other words, we use the system and the technology to try and bring people together around a news event and hope that that process is the thing that brings the truth out of the matter. In other words, it's not about having people be like journalists, it's more like having more people tell the story, so ultimately the truth will unfold.
Are there advantages to your approach over traditional media?
Yeah, I think so. I think the likelihood of us getting something wrong is in many cases lower, because if if there's many witnesses to an event, someone is going to correct an error if they see it. And it's faster. In other words, if something happens, the likelihood of one of our reporters being there is higher just because of the higher numbers of people who are involved in our organization than a traditional news organization. So you look at examples like during Hurricane Katrina, for instance, we had over 2,000 people in the area. So that's more than the entire Associated Press. And so if you have that number of people involved in telling a story, you're going to get a more complete story. You're going to get something that's more timely. You're going to get more perspectives on the subject. So I think there are real advantages.
So basically you're ensuring quality by the same principle as Wikipedia does? Something called swarm intelligence?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the general idea and the general philosophy. And if you think about other uses of kind of crowd-powered mechanisms, you think of the free market, right? The free market is a great example where, I don't know what the price of tomatoes in Berlin is, right? But if you get a whole bunch of farmers and a whole bunch of tomato buyers together, they can work it out themselves. So, in the case where you have a functioning free market, you can more correctly ascertain what the price of that tomato is. Well, the same mechanisms are in place, I think, for trying to figure out the truth of the matter. If you can, open up the dialogue to people who are involved in a news story, you're more likely to get at the truth.
Are there limits to the crowd-powered approach, for example, in stories that involve really expensive traveling and research?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there's, I think, the movement itself, I think, is really in its infancy. And this is the first stage in what I think will be a long evolving process. But I think that there are clear examples where we haven't quite figured out how to do things like investigative journalism. It costs the New York Times, I think, $40,000 to create a cover story, to get something on the front page. Well, there's nothing in citizen journalism that really allows for that kind of capital to fund that sort of enterprise. So I'm expecting that what will happen is that part of the solution will involve lowering the cost of that, right? Because you've got people who are all over the world, so you don't have to travel as much, and you can kind of divvy up the work, and people can volunteer, and so the cost of that is probably going to go down. But there still always will be some kind of cost to doing sustained, intelligent, labor-intensive work. So at this point in time, there are some solutions that are being considered and tested out. There's organizations like Spot Us who let people donate money for stories, and then they go and cover things, but they haven't quite got it scalable yet. But I think investigative journalism is going to be a challenge, and I also think that there are instances where you don't have the institutional protection of a news organization behind people, so they're less likely to, in some cases, do the kind of courageous things that a professional journalist would do if they've got lawyers and the ability to protect their people.
How is the platform financed anyway?
We're VC financed, so we have venture capitalists in Canada and the States who have invested about $12 million over the course of the company's lifespan. And right now we're pre-revenue, and we've done that by choice. We don't have to make money right now because we still have most of that in the bank.
But the intention is to make money eventually.
Yes, we are a for-profit company, and the revenue will come from at least two sources. One will be advertising, and we don't have ads on the site now, but we probably will in all likelihood by the end of the year, although that could change. And then the other is through services that we provide traditional media organizations. So right now we've got a pilot project. We're working with a large Canadian media company to provide a kind of citizen view on the stories that they're producing. So they'll write something about the Whistler fires, for instance, and then on that page there'll be a widget or some subset of information from people who have contributed photographs and comments and written their own